Welcome back to the Warehouse Podcast. Everyone, my name is Elijah. Today we're here to chat about one of the big events this weekend. Obviously, there were many. Given that Ryan O'Hearn did not do a whole lot in the All-Star game, it was not very Orioles focused. Uh, Obviously, that is a product of how this year has gone. Eh, it just is what it is. Usually last couple of years we've had a little bit more to talk about this weekend uh, in the major league sense of the word. But yeah, this weekend, not too much on the major league side, and we had really what is a super exciting draft. I think it when you have as many picks as we had, it's pretty difficult to mess it up, I would say. But needless to say, I think we did a good job. Pretty much all reports coming out agree with it from some of the folks who are evaluating prospects on the broader level. Think we got a lot of good value in a lot of places here. So I am only going to do this little rundown of the day one draft picks. That is for my own sanity and for yours, as we don't make this a 2 hour podcast. If you want to do a little bit of a deeper dive, definitely always recommend, that there's tons and tons of information out there. Absolutely can get it yourself. The source that I like to use, particularly for the Orioles slant, is the On the Verge podcast. Our friends and compatriots at the Believe Network. They do a great job. Their draft coverage was phenomenal this year. They had a live stream from day one as we went through, I think, our first four picks, and then also did a full recap at the end. Lots of good stuff over there. Definitely check them out. Um, but needless to say, I think the value I can provide here for you is I can go ahead, I can synthesize a bunch of information from some of these different sources, and I can pull it together into a nice clean package, and I can tell you about, the top three rounds of the draft, which I think in this sense are obviously where a lot of the value is going to come from. Um, and simultaneously, it's kind of the biggest names who you're going to see at top prospect lists for the Orioles and hopefully on the national level. So let's jump right into it. Right off the bat, the Orioles drafted Ike Irish. I guess I can show his picture here for those of you watching. Ike Irish, a catcher and outfielder from Auburn. Irish is, really a pretty talented dude. He was the 11th ranked prospect by MLB Pipeline. Um, Here, I should stop and caveat. Those of you watching on YouTube, you'll see I have MLB Pipeline up. I truly think that of the large publications, MLB Pipeline is probably the least reputable, but they've got a great user interface, and they let me pull up some nice pictures here. So, and they're not behind a paywall, so like it always a good reference. Some they certainly know more about the prospects than you or I do, but there are some instances where the broader consensus will not necessarily agree with what they have here, and I will talk through those as we go. Um, but yeah, so Ike Irish, he was the 11th ranked prospect by them. Um, we got him 19th. That was our first pick of the night. MLB Pipeline is giving him a 60 hit tool, 55 power. And I think we should stop there and we should say, like, that is where the value is in this pick. He is a super, super, super good hitter from the left side. We know Orioles love a left-handed bat. Um, you can see here he does have a strong arm. I think one thing that's important to note is that does not translate in terms of pop times. He really, I mean, he needs some work back there. He does not frame particularly well, does not block particularly well. He is a catcher, and the Orioles did announce him as a catcher, and I'm sure they will try to work him out. But there's a lot of consensus that his long-term fit is in the outfield. Let that strong arm play up with a full range of motion, obviously. Um, and yeah, he will certainly have the bat to hold down a corner outfield spot. Uh, you can see he's not exactly uber athletic, but we've seen worse out there. We ran out Anthony Santander last year all year, so in the relatively small confines of right field at Oriole Park at Camden Yards. Don't exactly need blazing speed. So Irish, yeah, I mean, lot of value with the bat here. Pretty much had really, really good results all year. He did play on the Cape Cod League last year. Hit 325, 438 on base, only 433 slugging. Some adjustments with the wood bats probably, but this year with Auburn absolutely took off. Popped 19 home runs, hit 364, 469 slugging, I'm sorry, 469 on base and 710 slugging. Definitely one of the top bats in the class. One of the kind of interesting things about him when you're sort of poking holes, he does miss a bit in the zone. You can see this zone contact rate of 81.5%. The major league average is 86.2% this year. And so seeing somebody who is whiffing a bit, even below average at the college level in the zone is a little bit of a red flag. But one of the interesting things about him is his contact rate outside of the zone, this OCON, or you'll see it as O dash contact percentage if you're looking at major league hitters. Um, his contact rates outside the zone are over 75%. So, when he does expand the zone, there's very, very little delta in how often he gets bat on ball. I think what that kind of tells me is that he's likely just considering too large of a zone as his quote unquote hitting zone. If he zones it, I need to stop saying zone. If he tunnels in a little bit on a smaller range, more tightly knitted around the strike zone, he'll probably have a little bit better contact rates, and obviously the swing decisions as a whole will improve. Maybe be able to get to that power a little bit more. I think one other thing to note about him, just as a profile, as a hitter, is that he's been known to expand the zone well, obviously, he's known to use all fields, I guess, and I think that also kind of goes with expanding the zone and the high contact rates outside of the zone. He is totally, totally willing to hit the ball in the air, uh, or I'm sorry, hit the ball to the opposite field. But the interesting thing about it is he hits the ball in the air, really, really repeatably. Um, it's interesting. Yeah, I think he kind of just has a sort of all fields approach right now. He's down to hit whatever. He just loves to swing the bat. And I'm sure the Orioles will try to hone that in a little bit. Um, and you can probably expect really good things. Now, the thing that I do think needs to be said about Irish is, again, a lot of people had him as a potential top 10 pick. He was talked about even as high as the number 3 pick to the Mariners. It does, I heard from Eric Longenhagen of Fangraphs and Keith Law of The Athletic that there were potential late breaking concerns with I don't know, Law said his makeup, quote unquote, but it's not really about his makeup. There were rumors of a video of him going around intoxicated, using some racially insensitive language. Uh, this is obviously something that is pervasive. The way that baseball is going is it is because of all the development happening at the lower levels. There is an increasingly um, high demand for, I guess, resources when you are younger, and that's a long way to say like you got to be rich to make it in the game right now. If you want to be going and optimizing your bat path at the time that you are 14 years old, that requires money. And the more that we slant towards money, the more that we slant towards, some rich white kids is what I'm trying to say. I guess I don't need to do it delicately. You know how we think over here. Um, the more that baseball at the youth levels slants in the favor of rich white kids, and those rich white kids, get better and then go to the best colleges, and this just continues getting reinforced, you are tapping into a demographic that has um, notoriously problematic views on pretty much everything. So I, I think that Ike Irish, right off the rip, he's a little bit hard to root for. I think that the Orioles got great value in terms of a baseball player, and hopefully he has some epiphany and uh, relearns his ways. But do want to caveat that he, has a pretty rough, I guess, rough public relations. What am I trying to say? His reputation right off the bat is not the best. Let's just put it that way. I think that because this was talked about as a potential reason that he was falling down draft boards, it seems that teams were reacting to it, and it was known enough to the point where it got to multiple national level writers. I think, there is fire amongst this smoke. I'm a believer that this is a real thing. So, Ike Irish, do what you will with the man, but the baseball player seems like he's pretty good. And I will cut the Orioles a tiny bit of slack here. The research that you do into the types of characters that you have is obviously going to be predicated on who you actually think will be available. By and large, Ike Irish was not supposed to be available at the 19th pick. So there is a chance that the Orioles just were not aware that this was the case with him, and they're now scrambling behind the scenes to figure out how they're going to manage this kid. There is a chance that that is the case. There is an equally large and maybe slightly larger chance that that's not the case. The Orioles knew what they were getting into and just loved the baseball player so much that they're willing to ignore it. Would not be the first time that a Baltimore sports entity has done such a thing. We saw Mike Green with the Ravens draft. Obviously, I don't know. I don't necessarily want to say that was more severe. It was just more of a tangible action that was being looked at. But I digress. Ike Irish, great bat, probably an outfielder, probably not a catcher, but at the same time, problematic human. Let's move on to somebody I don't know anything about their personality, which is probably better in this instance. Caden Bodine was the 30th pick for the Orioles. This was a compensation pick for Corbin Burns departing in free agency. Caden Bodine is a really fascinating dude, and you might be saying, "Oh my God, we really spent our first two picks on two catchers when we have Adley Rutschman and Samuel Basallo and all this stuff." And look, the very, very simple thing is you do not draft for need in Major League Baseball. You go ahead and you take what is likely the best value, and value in terms of what you as an organization think that you can maximize. If the Orioles think they're developing catchers really well right now, we've had Adley, we've had Basayo, we have, Yasmiel Boucher. I think I'm forgetting his first name, but um, we are developing catching prospects really effectively right now. Even Maverick Hanley can provide a lot of value in his limited ways. I think Bodine is kind of fascinating here because he's a switch hitting catcher. We love those. We just took Ethan Anderson last year. Um, but 60 grade hit tool. And I do think that just straight up a catcher with, who switch hits and that effectively is, putting bat on ball. I think that's really, really rare. Um, they give his power a 40 here. He did pop some home runs in college. Um, 5 home runs this year, which, is below average for the hitter friendly environment that college is. But at the same time, he's got a lot of bat talent here. And I think beyond the bat talent, you look at, well, I guess I should say one more thing about his bat before I move on. One of the fascinating things about him, I was talking about that zone contact. Remember, Major League average is 86%. I talked about some swing and miss with Ike Irish at 81.5%. Bodine was one of the highest zone contact rates in college baseball this year, all of Division One. He had a 96% zone contact. Only 4% of pitches that came through the zone that he took a swing at, he whiffed on. That is really, really elite contact levels. Um, the On the Verge guys, I think, mentioned that for the first month and a half, he did not miss a fastball in the zone or something like that. Just like ludicrous contact rates, clearly has a feel for where the barrel is at any given time. And beyond that, stepping over to the defensive side, this is a dude who undoubtedly will catch in Major League Baseball. Um, I am pulling up a graphic for those watching along, but I mean the pitches that this dude gets for strikes are so obscene. This graphic is showing, you know, pitches at the necks of hitters, pitches that are almost bouncing off the plate. He clearly is just an absolute wizard framing. And I think that is, super, super enticing. Adley Rutschman's framing has never been good, frankly. Mavericks was pretty good. Gary Sanchez is slightly below league average. Um, like stepping back a little bit, like Pedro Severino sucked at it. The Orioles have not had a primary catcher who is really, really talented. Um, in this sense, in the framing sense, in a very good while. So now that we've got, more concrete ways to go ahead and actually evaluate a catcher's framing, um, I think you will be able to see the value of this guy the second that he touches a major league field. And I do expect that, given just the high contact rates, he will touch a major league field pretty quickly. I think it's very, very reasonable to see a world where, assuming we don't extend Adley Rutschman or anything like that, to see a world where he might even take over primary catching duties and let Basayo DH a little bit more. Let Basayo play some first base, kind of move that around, and you play up Basayo's bat because you have a good floor for somebody who can control the zone and knock the ball around a bit on the offensive side, and you have so much defensive value from the defensive side. I think that's very reasonable. And if we do extend Adley Rutschman and Basayo, takes off as a defensive monster, then it's very, very simple. You trade this guy after you've developed him into a very valuable piece. This is, the large reason that you don't draft for need because so much can change in the time that these guys are in the system developing. And frankly, we don't, I think Caden Bodine is a very high floor prospect. It seems like he really has a lot of value that will translate pretty directly. But at the same time, man, he could break his leg, knock on wood. I hope that doesn't happen, but he could do it. And he could never play in the major leagues. These things happen. You don't draft for need. Uh, that's that. So Bodine, I think, also super good value here. He was the 32nd rated prospect. We got him 30th overall. That doesn't look too good. Some other folks had him higher than Pipeline. But if you are looking at Pipeline, you'll see that the 17th best prospect that Pipeline had rated, we got with the 31st pick. That's right. We had back-to-back picks. Why they went Caden Bodine 30 and Vehiva Aloy at 31, I don't know. They could flip-flop. I'm sure they'll have arguments over that as they start their professional careers together. But Aloy, I mean, I think the first thing to say is he won the Golden Spikes Award for the best player in college baseball. That is no small feat. A lot of people who have won this award have had success. One of them notably being Adley Rutschman. Um, I mean, he led the Arkansas Razorbacks, into the College World Series. He did just had a phenomenal season. I guess I'll give you some stats first. Um, so this season he hit 350, a 434 on base, 673 slugging, popped 21 home runs, OPS over 1100. And I think the other thing to note on the Cape Cod League last year, he went ahead and did a lot of damage there too. 309, 352, 642, 994 OPS with 8 home runs on the Cape Cod League last year with the wood bats, which obviously is very promising. I will note again, he struck out 64 times in 65 games. Uh, striking out almost once a game. That is a elevated rate, particularly for college baseball. I've talked about that zone contact rate ad nauseum here, but he was running about an 80% rate, slightly below Ike Irish. And what that tells you is this is a guy who will swing and miss a little bit. I think that Orioles are Orioles fans in particular are a little bit hesitant about swing and miss in a profile because of Vance Honeycutt and the struggles that we've had there. But at the same time, Aloy was, he's a super rare blend, I think, of surefire defensive ability up the middle. He, by all accounts, will play shortstop and having some very, very legitimate pop in the bat. Um, that's a unique blend. And if you can figure out some of the swing and miss issues, you've got a guy who can pop 20 home runs and play shortstop. That's very, very unique. And someone certainly worth taking a chance on. And he's just kind of a gamer, like I think all of the reports, all of the just eyewitness accounts from, if you ever went on and watched a Razorbacks game, the dude's awesome. He was a leader on the team. Everything good personality wise, seems like has been attributed to Alloy. And he personally, like, when he was available at pick 19, my brain that is not operating on the same level as Mike Elias or any of these teams, frankly. Uh, but my brain went ahead and said, "Man, I would love Vahiva Aloy. That is like the guy that I want." I had him singled out ahead of time, um, before the draft started, and then he was available, and somehow we managed to get him, 15, I guess 14 technically picks later. Pretty sweet. He is, he was supposed to go higher in the majority of mock drafts. We are thrilled that he floated down to us. And I think that, yeah, there's a really legitimate chance for maybe like I've seen the comp of like Jordan Westberg, but defensively sticking at shortstop better than Westberg is with the glove, but the same kind of, ability to impact the ball and a little bit of swing and miss that Westberg had coming out of college. Man, if we could turn him into Jordan Westberg with a up the middle glove, it's a super, super valuable player. Um, so yeah, super excited about Aloy. I think that this is those three alone were all guys that could have been taken in the top 20 and nobody would have batted an eye. I think Irish potentially in the top 10, nobody would have batted an eye. And so to have all three of them by the time we're at our 31st pick, our third pick of the day, I'm sure the Orioles were riding an absolute high. Moving on, this is the pick that we got from our friends down in Tampa for Brian Baker. We thank him for his services. This pick is Slater DeBrune. He is a 5'10", 187, very small outfielder. He has drawn a lot of comps to Corbin Carroll as a result of that, but slightly below average pop right now, but big time hit tool. Pipeline has 55 here. I've heard 60 more often on other sites. And then very fast. You see 65 run grade here. Fields like he's played center field in high school. Fields extremely, extremely well. Lots of bat to ball skills. And obviously, we will certainly try to train some bat speed and give him a little more pop. But this is, I think, somebody that it is kind of a high floor package at the same time. Even if he does turn into a little bit of a slap all fields, kind of doubles sort of hitter, obviously still has a high floor with the glove. And because he is coming out of high school, you've got tons of time to work with him. Um, Pretty excited about that. I think that he is. If you had to compare to somebody in the system currently, maybe in the mold of like an Austin Overn, um, just sort of, like gets good contact with the ball, does not really pop, however, and great in the field, good run times. It's all fine. I think the thing that needs to be said about Slater DeBrune, however, He's on Spotify. He's on Spotify under the name Lil Slay with I think three Y's if I'm remembering correctly. Um, I need to look it up real quick just to make sure I've got the right number. Oh yeah, Lil Slay. Three Y's. I have not heard good things about the music. I'm not trying to judge the dude. Go do your thing. I have found in my adult life, and I use this podcast as a means of doing so, that it is good to not do only one thing. It's good to use your brain and challenge yourself in other ways. So, by all means, let's slay, go do your thing, go slay. Um, yeah, also seemed like he was pretty good value at the back end of the first round. This was a comp A pick. Um, and after all that, the Orioles have acquired the draft rights to four guys, and then finally we make it into the second round. Kind of hilarious. You love to see that we have uh, acquired this much talent in the draft on day one, uh, before teams. Well, I guess the Los Angeles Dodgers did not pick until pick 40, so we have gone ahead and everyone I've talked about, it's been like I don't know, 20 minutes of a podcast. And that's only because I'm the abbreviated version and I'm trying to simplify for you and me. Uh, we have gotten all of that before the Dodgers have even picked a single soul. So you love to see like where we're at currently. And then Mike Elias did the thing that all Orioles fans just pine for and pray for. He took a pitcher. Um, this is Joseph Zerwa. And if anyone on podcast version is wondering if that sounded a little weird, it is Dzierwa. So my best guess is Zerwa. I haven't really heard it out loud. I will be frank. I was watching the draft with it muted, but what I can tell you about this guy, first off, he's 6'8". He's huge. He is a lefty, which is super fun. We love left-handed arms. I think that, um, typically when you hear somebody who's 6'8", you're thinking Jacob Mizorowski and huge, huge extension. That's not necessarily who Zerwa is. He has kind of a low and wide slot, which creates some super interesting angles. Does not get super elite extension, but has really, really good command. Let's see, Pipeline gives it a 55. And his fastball, sits in the low 90s, touches 95, and he has a low 80s changeup that just kind of tumbles. That is his best pitch. I think that this is a really, really nice package. Th as I was reading up on this guy, the thing that came to my mind very simply, given the somewhat low slot as well as Trevor Rogers, and we are seeing what a fastball changeup combo can do, even against opposite-handed hitters, even against righties. I think this is a promising package. And because the dude is so big, you have to anticipate the Orioles could get him up to the like 94, 95 range, touching 97. And this is all on a package of pitchability. This is all on a package of control, of finesse. And so any little bit of, I guess, any little bit of muscle that you can add to that, any little bit of velo will just help all of this stuff play up. And, in the fastball, again, Pipeline gives it a 55. In the fastball and the changeup, two above average or plus pitches. That's a really solid foundation, and the body tells you that there could be a little bit more in there. I was very excited about this. He's had good results pretty much throughout. I'll say this year, 15 games started. He was the Friday night guy for Michigan State. Had a 2.36 ERA. Struck out 104 guys in 90 innings, 91 innings. So, definitely like very good production overall. And the stuff seems like it'll play, and it also seems like it has projectability. So, super excited about Zerwa. Um, and kind of cool to see the Orioles. He was the 58th pick, spending a higher end pick, a second round pick on a pitcher. Um, I think that was partially enabled because we had four position players before that, but at the same time, getting those high-end arms into the system is super exciting. So the Orioles then decided to go with another arm, JT Quinn from Georgia. This guy is a totally different package from what I just described with Zerwa. Quinn, well, I guess he's also tall, 6'6", but he is a big righty, big fastball, big slider. He was a swingman for Georgia this year. I think as far as prospects or as far as pitching prospects go, he was one of the most prominent names in terms of folks who are relievers currently and could go ahead and make the transition to starters. One thing I thought was kind of interesting is he did actually play in the Cape Cod League this year. I think that was probably in an effort to go ahead and bump the stock as a starting pitcher. Um, he, had a lot of time. Let's see, at Georgia, pitched in 17 games, only started seven of them. So he went out to Cape Cod League. He started three games, had a 2.57 ERA. But the more important thing, I think, 14 innings, 25 strikeouts, and two walks. Once again, 14 innings, 25 strikeouts, two walks. So he goes up just for, I mean, literally three starts at the Cape Cod League, really dominates. Um, this is a guy who's touching 98. He is a guy who seems like has a big time fastball, arm side run, a slightly higher slot than Zerwa. He's not really the same kind of, you know, uh, I guess playing off horizontal movement. He's yeah. I mean, this is the kind of guy that you think you are taking the body and then you can help him figure out how to pitch. This is kind of the opposite of Zerwa in that sense, where you're taking the guy who is a really talented pitcher and you're trying to add a little bit more body to him. Um, but yeah, big time slider. Uh, let's see. He said, or I'm sorry, Pipeline says mid 80s slider features downer break, main put away pitch. Um, yeah, love that. He flips in a curveball. It doesn't seem like it's very good. That's fine. We can work with it. And at the worst, it seems like a pretty solid floor of a reliever. Once again, big time fastball, already touching 98, and another plus pitch in the slider. So the last guy we got tonight, I will also say, I'm sorry, before I get off JT Quinn, I do want to note he was pick number 69. So happy for him for that. He gets to carry that with him. Very nice. RJ Austin was our third round pick. He was the 93rd overall. This was kind of an interesting pick. I think that a lot of people, when they are looking at what the Orioles did on day one of the draft, this is the one kind of question mark they have. I think that's fair. Um, I think at the same time, this is probably somebody who goes under slot. The Orioles took a lot of JUCO pitchers later in the draft. I think that taking JUCO pitchers is, or any JUCO players is typically a way to bump up, the bonuses that you are giving. JUCO and high school often will receive the higher bonuses relative to their slots and talent. Um, and I think RJ Austin likely goes a little bit below what that slot pick, what the slot is valued at that pick. Um, Pipeline has him as the 112th prospect on here. Once again, he went 93. I saw other sources that definitely had him lower. Um, but yeah, let's talk about the dude himself. I think the first thing to note about him, he's played a bunch of different positions. Let's see, as a sophomore, saw action at all four infield positions as well as left and center field. Um, this past year he was more of a center fielder and seemed to handle it very, very well. But just kind of has the athleticism and kind of the innate know-how to handle anywhere on the field, which I kind of love to see. It shows some baseball IQ to be able to move around the diamond, and it shows that they trust him in a lot of different places. They trust him to handle this added workload of handling multiple positions. So I think the questions really arise. when you get over to his bat. Pipeline gives him a 50 hit tool and a 40 power. Uh, that's kind of interesting. That's not really the that's not really what I've gotten from other sources, I'll say. Um, like he is a good athlete. I guess they do mention, hand-eye coordination, like will assist the bat to ball, but I've heard that he really kind of has this herky-jerky swing that will really need some help. He's got a little hitch in it, like before he starts moving toward the ball. Um, but the thing that I saw, and it's not really mentioned here, but he did put up some max EVs well over 110. When he does get a hold of the ball, once again, he is a good athlete, but he really gets a hold of it. It does seem like there is a little bit of pop in there, um, and the athleticism to handle center field. So, this is a little bit, I think, of a power speed combo. Like the swing as a whole will need to be reworked pretty significantly, I think. That's fine though. Another thing about this guy, he did, struggle this year at the college level. This was his junior year. He hit 257, 353 on base, 383 slugging. That was a significant step down from what he did the year before as a sophomore. 335 batting average, 402 on base, 471 slugging. He hit 5 home runs in his sophomore year, only two this year, but also did have a really good showing on Cape Cod last summer. 321 batting average, 361 on base, 536 slugging. So did show some really good things with the wood bat last year. Maybe in over his or into his head a little bit, not over his head, because he did perform better, but maybe in his head a little bit over the course of this spring. And he was their full-time center fielder at Vanderbilt, if I remember correctly. So obviously handling a very very difficult position full time. I can say our friends On the Verge tweeted out about this pick, and EBJ, a former Vanderbilt center fielder with hit tool concerns of his own, um, coming out of the draft. Obviously, the hit tool has gotten better while he's been in our system, but EBJ quote tweeted said this dude is awesome. He's wildly excited about it. So I think this is a guy who's going to have great makeup, going to work really hard, going to maximize what he can. It is just a question of what can you get out of the bat? How well can you take some of that athleticism, refine the bat path, refine the approach to an extent where he becomes a productive hitter? Um, but there is always a place for guys who are not very good hitters, who are good defenders at a number of different positions. Um, that there is a floor for a utility player all throughout the minor leagues. And so, expect him to be in the system for a good while. Uh, he's likely the floor is a depth guy who never really makes it to the major leagues because the bat never figures itself out. The upside is, I don't know, a guy who pops 10 or 15 home runs, plays a good defense. Um, and that's fine. Not everyone is a home run. And once again, I think that taking Austin here, betting on your ability to fix up the swing a little bit, then enabled some of the moves that we took, or some of the moves that we made later in the draft, taking some of those JUCO and some high school arms, in particular. So we'll see. Um, that is the synopsis of day one. Once again, Ike Irish at the 19th pick, Caden Bodine with 30, Vahiva Aloy 31, Slater DeBrune, Lil Slay 37, Joseph Zirwa. I'm sorry, I'm trying to get that name. Zirwa, I think is right though. With the 58th pick, JT Quinn at 69, RJ Austin at 93. All in all, five position players, two pitchers. Of those five position players, we had two catchers, a shortstop, and two guys who probably can play center field. The Orioles stay very, very consistent in valuing players up the middle. Um, and once again, like Ike Irish probably moves off of that central position, but um, you start a guy there and you can move him off as the situation dictates, but you maximize your chance of having good players up the middle where the core of your defense is built, and Yeah, and those are positions where it is acceptable to have a below average or only very slightly above average offensive player because the defense is so valuable at those places. If you can get a good bat in there, you oftentimes build out a much more well-rounded lineup, and that's what the Orioles go for. You often find the best athletes at these positions. I think that certainly is the case with Alloy, with DeBrune, and with Austin in this case. All three seem to be really, really good athletes. Um, yeah, I think this is an absolute haul. Obviously remains to be seen how the Orioles go about signing all these guys. That will trickle in over the next month or so. But the potential for stocking the system as it currently stands with this draft, I think is really, really great. Uh, the On the Verge guys on their podcast were talking about where some of these guys would fit in. And it sounds like, three or four of these are going to slot right into the top 15, top 10 within our system and help build out the lower levels. I think that's super exciting. And I think, in the way of if we move Irish to the outfield, I think he moves very quickly. Kidd and Bodine should be able to move very quickly. Alloy might take a little bit of work, but and De Bruyne is a high schooler. Joseph Zerwa, I think, moves very, very quickly. Um, and then JT Quinn and RJ Austin probably spend some time, a number of years in the minors, refining themselves. But yeah, I mean, there's a chance that I think Bodine and Zerwa in particular probably rise really, really fast, are in conversations for 2027's opening day. Um, Fascinated to see how it shakes out. Fascinated to see what we get from this. I think the draft is a funny point because it's just this world of expectations, but also hopes and dreams, and none of it actually means anything for a number of years unless you're the Los Angeles Angels. But yeah, so we'll pocket these thoughts. We will continue watching the Baltimore Orioles Major League variety, and we'll go ahead and we'll see what we can do leading up to this trade deadline. Um, Man, it's going to be an interesting one. Also, before I get too far off of the trade deadline, I do want to say in the All-Star game, the only thing that the announcers could say about Ryan O'Hearn was that he was a trade candidate. And I think that's so tragic, for a guy who was, man, I guess he wasn't a waiver claim. He was a cash considerations trade, if I'm remembering correctly. But, effectively just let go by the Royals, transformed his career, became this wildly disciplined hitter. And, so far this year, one of the top like 15 bats in the American League. And all you can say about him is he's a trade candidate. It's kind of sad. And, speaks to the faults of national announcers and people who do not necessarily care quite so much about each individual person and only focus on the broader storylines that they have force fed to them. So anyway, wanted to complain about that. Shout out Ryan O'Hearn. Um, he had a cool jacket, 32 inscribed over orange on the lining inside his jacket on the runway. I thought that looked good. Um, That's all I got for you. Very exciting draft for the Orioles. I think this has the chance in 3, 4 years for us to look back and say, man, this kind of like reshaped the future of the Orioles in a way that the 2019 draft did. It's gonna be good. Like be excited. Yeah. Yeah, I'll leave it there. This has been the Warehouse Podcast. My name is Elijah. As always, if you could follow the show, like the show, comment on the show, subscribe to the show, whatever you want to do, interact with the show, with us. We are the show. Um, we're over on Blue Sky at the Warehouse Pod. We are on YouTube. Always wave to YouTube as I say that. If you want me to wave to you, go check us out on YouTube. Anyway, uh, yeah, I'm gonna get out of here. Day two also had a lot of interesting arms, I think. A number of interesting players overall, but I was particularly intrigued with the number of arms we took, particularly from the JUCO level. I think, the Orioles are kind of seeing a crop, a demographic of maybe unfinished arms and those who have not gotten the refinement of an SEC school or something of that sort. And before they transfer over to those and their price rises, the Orioles think that they can get these guys at lower rounds and have some moldable clay. Uh, we'll see how it works out. I'm curious. I'm excited. And I think you should be too. That's all I got for you. This has been the Warehouse Podcast. My name is Elijah. Everyone have a great night. Go O's.